Hello, this is Faye from Faye-Hughes Designs, and this is the video tutorial for the Festive Feet socks. I'm going to take you through the materials used, the construction of the sock, the yarn that I've used, and then some of the very specific techniques that are used within this pattern, and I'll take you through them step by step. So we'll look at casting on, the Latvian braid that's used at the very top of the cuff, the rib and how I've created that, how to make jogless stripes, and although this isn't a striped sock, it's a great technique for when you have a colour change. How to do a heel flap, the gusset decreases, rounded toe and the Kitchener stitch. I will also show you how to add new colours in without having lots of ends to weave in. So first things first, the materials used. For these socks you will need 100 grams of a 4-ply, which is light fingering weight yarn, and a mini skein, which is 20 grams. So the yarn that I've used comes out at 400 metres, 437 yards per 100 grams, and the mini is of the equivalent yarn weight. I tend to use 2 short circular needles when I'm making socks, and for this yarn weight I'm using 2.25 millimetres. Normally for a 4-ply light fingering weight yarn I would use a 2.5 millimetre needle, but because I'm using River Knits yarn, it's got a very high twist on it, which makes it perfect for socks, but I like to go down a needle size for it, so hence I'm using 2.25mm needles. I also need 2.25mm double pointed needles, DPNs, and I use them when I get to the heel, picking up stitches around the heel, and also for the toe when I'm on the decreases. But if you prefer to use magic loop, then go ahead and use that method. Either, whatever your preferred needles are, it's interchangeable for this pattern. You'll also need 2 place markers, a pair of scissors and a finishing needle. So on to construction. Festive Feet socks are a cuff down pattern, and it starts with a Latvian braid, which is quite a nice additional detail, and I'll take you through that in the techniques. You've then got a 1x1 rib where you're alternating your colours between the purl and the knit stitches. It has a heel flap, which I've used a slightly different I've partridge. I've called it the extended I've partridge pattern within that. It's got your gusset decreases, and I also use a rounded toe that I've created because I'm not a massive fan of the wedge toe, so I tend to do a rounded toe with a colour change in there. So let me show you the yarn that I've used for this pattern. It's from River Knits. It's a British Blue-Faced Leicester, and the one that I'm using was specifically dyed for our Santa's Knit Sack collaboration. So unless you got in there quickly and managed to buy the collaboration, you are most likely using a different yarn. I would tend to go with anything that is 400 metres per 100 grams if you're going to substitute. But the base that Becky and Marcus have used for this collaborative yarn is the same as their standard base. So if you want to find other sock yarn of theirs, anything that comes under their 4-ply yarn will work as a substitute for this pattern, and you just choose whichever contrast mini you would like. The one that I'm using is one of the 4 sets that they put forward for our collaboration. As I said earlier, if your chosen yarn is a 4-ply light fingering weight and it doesn't have such a high twist on it, then you might want to move up to a 2.5mm needle. So just before we get started, I want to apologise for the state of my hands. They're never pristine, but I've just come back from vending at a show, so they are just utterly battered. So apologies that they're not all that neat, but I'm sure you're here for the tutorials and the techniques and not to look at my hands. So this is how I tend to cast on for sock projects. It gives me a loose enough top that has got stretch but also not too stretchy, that I have socks that fall down. So what I do is get the end of my yarn, trap it down with my thumb and wrap my yarn round 10 times. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Pinch it and then I know that that's 10 stitches worth. There's 20, 40, 60. So that means I'm never going to run out of yarn. If anything, I've probably got a little bit more than I need, but I can start with my my slip knot there, and then I simply use the thumbtail cast on method. So I use my thumb, I pick up with the needle from the left and under, I keep the other side in my right hand, I place that over the top and from the left of my needle, and I pop that loop back over from my thumb and pull it in, not too tightly. Do the same, wrap my thumb, take my needle to the left and under, use the yarn from my right over the top from the left and under, and then pop that loop over and pull it. And once you've got the hand of this cast on, it's really speedy to do, and the secret is keeping your tension quite loose but even, so that you get a nice even cast on. I use this for all of my circular projects. In fact, I pretty much use it for every project that I do, because I hate doing the standard cast on for knitting. I find it very time consuming. So I'm going to keep on with this method until I have got 60 stitches on. 6, 8, 60. And as you can see, I have got a bit of a tail left, not too much, and I haven't cut myself short, basically. So I'm just going to cut that off a little so I don't get mixed up between the two. So I've got my beginning of round marker ready. I have got my yarn B ready. I'm still keeping yarn A on, and I need to join the rounds ready to start the Latvian braid part of it, which looks a lot more complicated than it is. It's actually just 3 rounds that make the braid up. So just to show you how the Latvian braid looks, and what you can do if you want to is alternate the direction of the arrows. So in the written pattern with the photographs that I've shown, I did passing the yarn under for round 2 and over for round 3. And within this tutorial, what I want to show you is how you can get right leaning arrows, so that when my socks are side by side, you have one that faces that way and one that faces this way. So let me show you how I am going to do that. So I'm making sure that my stitches aren't twisted, and I want to keep these two as tight in as possible. So what I need to do first of all is pop my beginning of round marker in there and knit my first stitch of round 1 in yarn A, and try and keep that nice and tight. And then what I need to do is knit the second stitch in yarn B. So I need to join that in. There we go. Next stitch, yarn A. Next stitch is yarn B. You might find it easier if you get the 2 tails from your 2 yarns and keep them tucked in under your hand. So next one is yarn A, and you alternate all the way around, and no matter how many stitches you have cast on, you should be finishing up with yarn B. So I will catch you up at the end of round 1. Right, so I've just completed round 1, and I am ready to start round 2. And one of the things that's essential to know is that you are going to be, whatever colour stitch you're going into, that's the colour of yarn that you are using. So the first thing that you do is pull both of your working yarns to the front, because all of these stitches are going to be purled. Now, what makes it interesting now is how you actually create the braid. So if you start from a position whereby your yarns are completely separate, so they're not at all intertwined, because they are going to become very intertwined, and that's just what you have to deal with. So I said that for the one in the pattern with the photos, I passed every yarn under, which means that if I was going for that one with the green, I passed it under the red and then I worked with it. Now, because I want this sock to lean the other way, what I'm going to do is always pass the yarn over. So let me show you how that looks. So there's purl number 1. I'm passing my red yarn over the green yarn. And notice also that I'm keeping my tension really quite loose on this. I'm onto a green one and I'm passing it over the red. And I'm not tugging on my yarn. I just want to keep it nice and loose, because the braid is tighter than a rib, so I want to make sure that I'm not tugging on it and creating issues later when I'm trying to get it on my foot. Green yarn is going over the red. Red yarn is going over the green. And over, and I do that all the way around, alternating the colours. I'm going into a red stitch, so I'm using my red yarn and it's going over the green. I'm going on to a green stitch, so I need my green yarn and it's going over the red. And I do that all the way around, making sure that my yarn is always going in the same direction. It's always over, over, over. And I do that right the way to the end of the round. And by the end of the round, my yarn will be really tangled up. You can probably see that it's already started. That's okay, don't untangle it, just leave it be. Because on round 3 you'll be going in the opposite direction and it will completely untangle itself. So I'm going to keep on with this all the way around. So I'm coming up to the end of round 2, just got a couple more stitches to do. So over and over. And then slip that marker. And you're going to continue round 3 as a purl. And what's different about this one, look how twisted up my yarn is instead of going over, I would have wanted to have gone over like that, but instead I'm going under. And by passing it under, I'm taking the twist out of the yarn that's built up, and I am making the stitches go in the opposite direction. So the red one comes under, and I work with it from underneath, and the green one comes under, what I find easier is to take the one that I've just used, hold it in my hand, and then pull the new one under. So there's the red, go on to green, so put the red underneath the green, which forces the green under essentially. I want the red, and I need it to come under, because I did over on round 2. Green is under, and the red is under. And by the time I get back to the beginning, I should have absolutely no twists, if I've done this right, in my yarn at all. They'll be back to being 2 separate strands. you can see that because I've changed the direction from one to the other, I've got one that's left leaning and one that's right leaning. You don't have to do this, to be honest. You can just do exactly the same for either or. It's just the way that my brain works. I like the symmetry of it. I like the idea that they are the same idea of a sock, but different from left to right or right to left. So I'm going to continue this all the way round. I'll show you what the braid looks like at the end, and then I'll move on to show you how you do the 1x1 ribbing with the two different colours. One final stitch should be coming under, and if I've done it correctly, then I should have no, yay, done. So I don't have twists in my yarn, they're absolutely fine. And I've got my braid all the way around, and it's got a decent amount of stretch to it, which is exactly what I was after. So let me quickly show you how I've done the 1x1 rib, because I'm losing daylight. It's winter here in the UK. It is knit 1, purl 1, 1x1 all the way around, and you're going to do 12 rows of that, and then 2 rows in yarn B, just to finish it off and give it a neat finish to the project before you go down to your 4 to 5 rows in yarn A. So let me quickly show you how that's done, and again, whatever stitch you're going into is the colour that you're going to use. So you're going to start with a yarn forward in yarn A, and that's a purl. Put that yarn back and do a knit with yarn B. And what I would say is really important here is have yarn B to your right and yarn A to your left. So I'm going to yarn forward with yarn A, do a purl, yarn back, and then do a knit with yarn B. Yarn forward, yarn A, purl, yarn back, knit with yarn A. And by keeping yarn B on the right and yarn A on the left, I'm not twisting those stitches, and every time I do a yarn B knit, I'll just show you what it does. There's my purl. So what it means is I'm taking yarn B and it's always going over the top of yarn A, and what that does is it gives it dominance over yarn B, and dominance also means prominence basically. I'll show you what that means on the one that I've already done. Can you see how the knitted stitches really pop up? I mean, they would anyway, because they will, and the purls stand back. But if you don't keep the two separate, you end up with different size stitches down these lines, and it just doesn't look as neat. So by keeping yarn B on the right, yarn A on the left, and keeping that colour dominance with yarn A, you just get this lovely prominence throughout the rib with your yarn B stitches. So basically, like I said, I'm going to continue with that 1x1 rib. Knit stitches are always yarn B, purl stitches are always yarn A, keeping the dominance right, and that's 12 rows of rib and then 2 rows of knit in yarn B before I go back to yarn A. And what I'm going to do at the end of that stitch is I'm not going to cut yarn A, I'm just going to carry it down for these 2 rows and then start knitting with it again. I don't see the point in cutting it for two little rows, but I will trap it down on those 2 rows so I know it's been carried down. And that's it. So next I want to show you how to do the jogless stripe. And what I would suggest is that you do this technique at the top when you're coming away from yarn B and starting back with yarn A when you're coming down the leg of your sock. You can see I've just done it there. And also that you do it when you're changing over to yarn B from yarn A at the bottom at the toe. And the way that you do it is that you do one full round in your new colour, and then slip your marker and you go to the stitch below. What you do is get your needle and pop it into the right hand leg of the V of the stitch below, pull it up and pop it onto your needle. You'll end up with a loop from your yarn B and a loop from your yarn A from the stitch below, and you simply knit the two together and then keep on knitting round. So you knit one round, and then on the second round you pull up the right hand leg of your stitch from the round below. And what that does is, because when you're knitting in the round you're essentially knitting in a spiral, it helps to just pull that work up and balance it out and even out the round so it looks neater. Let me show you how it looks on the sock that I've already finished. I'm even struggling to find it, to be honest, because it's that good at doing the join. So it's on this side and it's going to be that stitch there, and I can't see it. Whereas if you're going from such contrasting colours from one to the other, if you don't use something like a jogless stripe technique, then you see a very definite step between the two. So this is a really nice technique to have under your belt. Yeah, I use it a lot for many different projects. And that's it, there's really nothing to it. Just make sure that you make the step on the second round rather than on the first, and then continue as per the pattern. So I finished my 4 to 5 rows for the leg part, the calf part of my sock, and that's 4 to 5 rows after I changed back to the main colour yarn. Now I'm going to put in my heel flap, which I want to do in the contrast colour. So what I'm going to do is cut away my yarn A, leaving a good 10 centimetres for me to weave in afterwards. I can pop that out of the way and get ready to bring yarn B back into play. I'm now about to start working in rows, so I'm swapping over to my double pointed needles, 2.25mm, and I'm only working on the first half of my stitches. So this is a 60 stitch sock, so I'm just working with the first 30 stitches. I'll show you what to do with your remaining 30 stitches in a moment. So it starts with a slip one purlwise, and the reason for doing it purlwise is it doesn't twist the stitch and it makes it much easier to pick up when you come back down the side of the heel flap. So that was slip one, and next is knit one, and again I'm leaving about 10 centimetres for weaving in afterwards. Hook that over, so that's a knit. Slip one, and this time I'm going knitwise. Make sure I'm not working with the tail. Knit one, slip one, knit one. Let me get that out of the way. Slip one, knit one, slip one, knit one. And I do that right the way across until I have used up my first 30 stitches, and I should be finishing on a knit stitch. It's really important that you get that right, because the first stitch of the next round is to slip it. So you want to make sure that you got the knit right to be able to slip it next time round. And just have a little count. Every even number should be your contrast, so that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 18, 20, 22. And continue, slip, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So that's my first 30 stitches on the double pointed needles. Just double check I've got my numbers right, so I should have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 2, 4, 6, 8, 30, which are remaining on my short circular needle. I'm going to pop that end inside my sock, and I'm going to do exactly the same with my short circular. So just get the needle, pop it inside your sock, and that's it, out the way. So it doesn't bother you, it just stays tucked in there. It doesn't matter that it pokes out, and then it's out the way, ready for me to continue with my heel flap. So row 2 of the heel flap starts out in the same way. You slip one purlwise, and then you just purl all the way back. Now what you'll find when you come back and you're purling towards the end is that your stitches will become quite a lot looser because you've got 2 live ends here. Doesn't matter, you just keep on giving them a little tweak just to tighten them up, and then when you get onto your next rows they will be tighter, and you can also deal with them when you weave in these ends. You can tighten it up again. So there we go, we've got the first 2 rows of our extended eye of partridge. Row 3 is a continuation of row 2, so slip one purlwise. Make sure you're not working with the tail end. Knit one, slip one knitwise, knit one, slip knitwise, knit one, slip knitwise, knit one, all the way to the end, and again you should be finishing up on a knit stitch. Okay, and then row 4 is a repeat of row 2 where you just slip one purlwise and then purl all the way back. So slip one, purl all the way back. So we're moving on to row 5 of the extended eye of partridge, and this is where it changes up, and again it's on a 4-row repeat. So rather than doing slip one knit one, you're slipping 2, and again first time round you are slipping purlwise, and then you're going to slip knitwise, and then knit one, slip, knit, slip, knit, slip, and it's pretty much the same as it was for the initial rows 1 and 3, but you just have different stitches on the end. Knit, slip, and you keep that going, knit, slip, knit, slip, knit, slip, until the final 2 stitches. Knit, slip, knit, slip, knit, slip, and with the last 2 you knit them both. Turn your work, and row 6 is the same repeat, so it is for every purl row, slip one purlwise, purl all the way to the end. Okay, so we're coming up to row 7, and it's exactly the same as row 5. So you slip one purlwise, slip one knitwise, knit, slip, knit, slip, knit, slip, all the way to 2 stitches from the end, and those final 2 stitches get knitted. And then slip one, knit the final 2, knit one, knit 2, and then I'm purling standard on the way back, and that is your row repeat. So I've come to the end of the heel flap, and the next part is to do the decreases, which gives you the shaping for the base of the heel of your foot. So we're on a purl side, so what you want to do is slip one purlwise, and then you're going to purl 16, 15, 16. Then purl 2 together and purl 1. Now that's what you do for a 60 stitch sock. If it was a 64 stitch, then you would slip 1 purlwise, purl 17, purl 2 together, purl 1. If it was a 68 stitch, slip 1 purlwise, purl 18, purl 2 together, purl 1, and 72 stitch, slip 1 purlwise, purl 19, purl 2 together, purl 1, but all of those details are in the pattern. And then you turn your work, keeping your yarn at the back, and what you want to do is slip 1 knitwise, knit 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, slip, slip, knit, so SSK, knit 1, and turn your work. You're going to slip 1 purlwise, purl 6, so we're adding 1 to the number that we're knitting or purling, so we knitted 5, we purl 6, and we purl 2 together, and purl 1 and turn our work. And this time we're going to knit 7, so you slip 1 knitwise, knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the 2 that you're going to slip, slip, knit, you'll see that you'll have a gap there, so that's how you always know if you're right and true, because you end up closing that gap by either purling 2 together or doing an SSK. So slip, slip, knit those together, so my left needle is going into the front of the 2, and I knit them together and knit 1. So next time round I'm going to purl 8 because I knitted 7, so I add 1 onto it. Slip 1 purlwise, and purl 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And purl 2 together, and again you can see that gap, and it's that gap that you're closing up with your purl 2 together, and purl 1. And you continue with this. I'll come and show you what it's like at the end of the row, but because we've just purled 8, this next row we're going to be knitting 9. Slip, slip, knit, knit 1. Next one is purl 10. I'll come back when I'm coming towards the end. So I'm coming up to my final row of the heel shaping. I've just done a slip 1 purlwise, purl 14, purl 2 together, purl 1, and that's taken me to my very final stitch. So I need to slip 1 purlwise this time because it's coming onto the edge of my heel stitches that I'll be picking up, and then knit 15. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, SSK, slip, slip, knit, and knit 1. and that's me used up all of my stitches and done the decreasing, and that's given me that nice shape which will fit the very back of my heel and the bottom of my heel. And then I'm ready to pick up stitches down the side, back to using yarn A. So that's me finished now with yarn B, so I can cut that. So the next thing to do is start picking up your stitches down the side of your heel flap. And I've started that just so you can see how it looks and how it looks on the inside. You can see that you haven't gone through the slip stitches, and that's one of the reasons, well, that's the reason that you slip the stitches purlwise, because it doesn't twist them. And if you kind of unfurl the heel flap, then you can see very easily where it is that your needle goes through. So it goes under the stitch, yarn round and pull it up through, pull it through and pull it through. Now that's given me 19 stitches long here that I've picked up down the heel flap. But what I actually want to do, because there's quite a gap here between the two, is pick one up in between, so that would give me 20, and that will just neaten up and close that gap a little and mean that I won't have a hole coming through on my sock. So then I need to pop my beginning of round marker in, and you can see that I'm picking up the stitches with my second short circular needle. I just find this much easier than using double pointed needles to pick up all the stitches all the way around. It's a neater solution for me, so it's what I prefer to do. So my next step is to pick up, well, to knit all of those stitches that were across the front of the foot that have just been sat on my needle waiting to be used. These were the ones that were tucked in. So I'm going to knit across them and then come and pick up all of these stitches on the other side of the heel flap. So I've knitted across the front of the foot and I've just added my halfway marker. And what I want to do is pick up one from the yarn A stitches below again, so I'm just closing that gap and won't have like holes at the corner of my heels. And then I need to pick up 19 up here, so there was my one original, that gives me 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17, 18, and what you'll find is, because you've done a 35 row heel, on one side you will have 19 stitches to pick up, and on the other you'll have 18. So what I tend to do on the second side is do one through the front loop of my stitch, that gives me 19, and one through the back, and that gives me 20. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20 stitches, and it is essential that you have picked up the same number of stitches both sides of your heel flap. And then I just need to knit off this double pointed needle that I was using for the heel flap and knit all the way around to 3 stitches before my beginning of row place marker, and then I'll show you how you start the decreases for the gusset. but you can see you've got some nice shaping in there for the heel, and we've got the stitches picked up almost all the way around. So I've picked up all the stitches, I've come all the way back round, and we're ready to start the gusset decreases. Now you've stopped 3 stitches before the end, and that's because what you need to do is do your first decrease at the end of the round. So that was a knit 2 together and knit 1, and then you're starting a new round, and you're starting that by slipping your marker and knitting all the way across the front of the foot. And when you get to this middle of round marker, you want to just slip it and then you're on to another decrease. Now because it's a decrease after the marker, what you're going to do is knit 1 and slip, slip, knit 2 together, and this is a bit tight to begin with because you've got so many stitches on your needle, but that's it, that's your decrease. And then you're going to knit all the way around. So I'm knitting back to the beginning of round marker, knitting all the way around again and stopping 3 stitches before. So this is me on round 2, and I've just done the second decrease, and what it means is that over every single 2 rounds you're doing 1 decrease, 1 on each side of the marker. You're never decreasing on the stitches that are on the front of your foot. You're only ever decreasing on the side that is marked with the heel flap. So that means I will always have, for my 60 stitch sock, 30 stitches on the front of my foot that never get decreased until I come to the toe decreases. And so I'm coming up to my beginning of round place marker, and I know that last time it was a decrease. I can see where those 2 stitches were pulled together for a decrease. It's got like 3 legs to it rather than just the 2. So I know that this is a knit round that I'm coming up to, so I don't do any decreases to it this time. I just knit past it and slip my beginning of round marker and do exactly the same on this side. So I don't decrease it on this time. I am starting a new round, and that's knit past that one as well. But I'm going to knit up to that point so I can show you what the slip slip knit decrease looks like, and it'll help you identify it and be able to read your knitting. It's really helpful because the gusset decrease actually takes quite a while to do, and if you get interrupted in between it, then it's good to be able to look back to either where you would have done a knit 2 together or where you would have done a slip slip knit, and be able to identify it and know where you should be. So I'm slipping that marker. I know it's going to be a knit, and can you see if you go 2 stitches in, that's where I did an SSK, and you can see there's a left leaning stitch on top of another stitch, and it looks quite different from a standard knit stitch, which has got 2 legs, and again you can kind of see 3 legs there. So that helps me to identify if I have to stop and I don't get to write down where I am in the pattern. That helps me to identify that I would be knitting that one this time round. And then I need to knit all the way back round to 3 stitches before and do a decrease. Knit across the top, slip the marker, do a decrease next time round, knit all the way around, slip the marker, knit, slip the marker, knit all the way round, knit 3 stitches before and do the decrease. So like I say, over every 2 rows you're doing 2 decreases, one just before the next round marker, and then you start the new round, and then you do the next decrease is at your halfway point marker afterwards. It's quite a tricky technique to get used to begin with, but if you just keep on referring to the pattern and you learn to read your knitting, it becomes a lot simpler. You just begin to know where you are with it, and you get into a rhythm of knowing whether it's a decrease or a knit round. So I'm going to continue with my gusset decreases all the way around until I have come back down to and decreased down to the same number of stitches on this side of the marker, so on the heel flap side of the marker, as I have on the front of foot. So because it's a 60 stitch sock, I have 30 stitches here which are never decreased, and I need to keep on decreasing until I have 30 stitches on the heel flap side of the marker, and that takes me back round to 60 stitches overall. So I'll crack on with that, and then I'm going to keep on knitting down until I get to the toe. So one of the things that you'll most likely notice where you've joined yarn B in to make the heel is that on one side you won't have a hole and it will be lovely and neat, and on the other side you will have a little bit of a hole that's formed, and that's just really easy to deal with when you're weaving in, because you'll have two tails there that you can weave in, and you just give them a little tug, and as you're weaving in, just close up any gap that may have occurred. Try and keep the yarn B colour to the yarn B area and the yarn A colour to the yarn A colour when you're trying to take those little holes out. I can show you, there we go. You can't see any holes on the sock that I've already woven the ends in on. So the next part of the technique that I would like to show you is how I like to bring an incoming yarn in. So I've knitted all the way down, I've done my gusset decreases. For me, I've done 4 to 5 rows after the gusset decrease all the way around, and I'm ready to add my toe in. And the toe is in your contrast colour, so it's in yarn B. Now I could just knit to the end of my my row and then add the new yarn in, but I've been working on a technique which allows you to add in and not weave in ends, which is, I'm not a massive fan of weaving in ends, so I'll always do everything I can to try and not. So this is how I would add an incoming yarn. I'm going to place it over the yarn that I'm still working with and leave about an inch tail, and then just knit that stitch still in yarn B. When I come to the next stitch, I'm placing my yarn over and knitting still with the yarn that I'm meant to be working with, which is yarn A. On the next stitch, I'm placing it back and knitting with yarn A. Back again with the next stitch and knitting with yarn A. And I do that right the way along, and I do that for 8 stitches. And I'll show you in a moment what that does. So it's securing down the incoming yarn, the new yarn that I'm going to be working with in a moment. There's my last stitch in yarn A, and you can see that yarn B has been attached all the way along, and it's attached in there really quite firmly. And what this can do is stop that little hole appearing where you add a new yarn in. You're never going to cut this, you leave that 1 inch tail there. Don't cut it all the way up here because that will unravel it. Just leave that be and that will be fine. I've tested this technique out with my husband who goes hill climbing, and he has tested this up Nevis and Snowdon, and his socks are absolutely in perfect condition. There's no unravelling, and for me there's no need to have to weave in ends, which is perfect. So let me just show you how that looks on the sock that I've already done on the inside. So I've obviously continued with the toe. Here's where the yarn B was the incoming yarn, and then what you're going to do is reverse out that technique and trap down yarn A over 8 to 9 stitches and leave a 1 inch tail, and that is perfectly secure there, ready for you to wear your sock. So when it comes to doing the outgoing yarn, we've just done the incoming one here and secured down yarn B. I've slipped that stitch marker and I'm now getting rid of yarn A because I'm going to be continuing in yarn B. So what I want to do, I find it slightly easier if I put my needle in first. Cross yarn A over yarn B, cross yarn A over yarn B and knit with yarn B, and do exactly the same as I did for the incoming. Cross it over again, so with every stitch you are trapping down yarn A and knitting with yarn B, and crossing over again, knitting, and again, and knitting, and I'm going to do that for about 8 to 9 stitches. So you can see that I have trapped down yarn A over 9 stitches, and then all I'm going to do is cut that, leave a 1 inch, cut that, leave a 1 inch tail, and then I can just continue on in yarn B as per the toe. And that's it. So there's my incoming yarn and there's my outgoing yarn, and that will be perfectly secure. Like I say, if you don't have an issue with weaving in ends, then join it wherever you like. What I wouldn't do is leave a longer end and then weave this in the other way, because what it tends to do is part the stitch columns. Best plan is to just leave 1 inch and then leave those tails there. They don't affect you in any way, just leave them be. If you feel when you've done your incoming outcoming yarns like it's a little bit loose, just get the 2 ends that you've got and give them a little tug, and that will just tighten up those stitches. Let me show you how that looks then from the outside. It's tightened up those stitches and you can't see where the jog was. And like I said, you don't weave in those ends, you just leave them as they are. Make sure you've got 1 inch either side, and that will be fine. So we're finishing up now on the toe, and one of the things that I like to add into my patterns is a few rounds of just plain knitting to extend the size of the toe. I'm not a massive fan when the contrast toe is a little bit too short. I just don't think it looks that nice. So within the pattern, no matter how many stitches you're doing for your sock, you will be given how many rows you need to do before you actually start the decreases. And the toe pattern that I give you will give you this rounded toe, because again, I'm not a fan of the very pointy wedgy toe that you can get. So this gives you a really nice decrease, and I find that it fits nicely on my foot and looks nice. So I'm doing a 60 stitch sock, so I've already done my 5 rounds with just the plain. And then the thing to remember with the decreases is that once you've slipped the marker, you're always going to knit 1 either side, and if you're going after the marker, then your decreases are always slip, slip, knit. And that's my first decrease. And then I need to knit all the way to 3 stitches before the next marker. And they're coming up to that now, I've just got 2 more. And then because the next decrease is before the marker, that is always a knit 2 together. So 2 stitches in 1, knitted together, knit 1, and that's 2 decreases done on the first half of the sock, and then it's just a repeat of that for the second half. So knit 1, slip, slip, knit, and then knit 3 stitches from the next one, knit 2 together, knit 1, and that's my decrease. And then just keep on following the pattern for the instructions on how to continue doing your decreases to get the rounded toe. I tend to move over to double pointed needles once I've done the so decrease, knit 3 rounds, decrease, knit 2 rounds, decrease, and roughly around about there, that's when I move over to double pointed needles. So I'm going to continue to do the decreases on this sock, and I want to get it down to 12 stitches on both sides, so 24 stitches in total, 12 stitches on 2 double pointed needles. And I'll come back and see you just before we get to that point, because then I'll show you how to do the Kitchener stitch. So you can see that I have come down to 12 stitches on each of my needles, and I'm ready to do a graft, and I'm doing the Kitchener stitch. And I've given you instructions for this in the pattern, but also given you a diagram because many people are visual learners. What you can see is I've cut my yarn, I've kept it attached, and I've given myself about a 15cm tail. I'm using quite a big needle, and I'm using one with a fairly blunt end, which will make your life quite a bit easier. And so what you do is start by scooting your stitches up to the end of your needle, and I am going to start by placing my needle into the front stitch on the front needle knitwise and taking it off. Pull that through and then go into the front needle purlwise and leave it on. Then I'm moving to the back needle and I'm going in purlwise and I'm taking it off and pulling my yarn through, back needle knitwise, leaving it on and pulling my yarn through. And you're doing this kind of figure of 8 movement with each set, so it's a group of 4 movements over 4 stitches, and there's a way of speeding that up if you don't pull through until you've finished on the needle. So if I say front needle knitwise off, purlwise on, and then if I pull through my yarn, that's quicker. Back needle purlwise off, knitwise on, pull through my yarn. Then I'm back to the front needle, knitwise off, purlwise on, back needle purlwise off, knitwise on, and you just continue with that rhythm. Front needle knitwise off, purlwise on, back needle purlwise off, knitwise on. Pull my yarn through, and I keep on doing that and until I'm down to one final stitch. Front knitwise off, purlwise on, back purlwise on, off, knitwise on, front knitwise off, purlwise on, back purlwise off, knitwise on, front knitwise off, purlwise on, back purlwise off, knitwise on, front knitwise off, purlwise on, back purlwise off, knitwise on, front knitwise off, purlwise on. I'm using such a big needle just so that you can see it properly. Usually I would use a smaller one. And then back purlwise off, knitwise on, and front knitwise off, purlwise on, and back purlwise off, knitwise on, and that leaves me with 2 stitches left, and all you need to do is remove your needle because you've already secured down these 2 stitches. And what I then tend to do is pop my hand into my sock. Let me re-thread that again, and then find roughly where the stitches have come through, go down a stitch into the side, pull that through, and that will get rid of those 2 stitches that you've just pulled off. And then you can weave in that end. And remembering that if you've done the incoming and outgoing yarns, you don't need to weave those ends in. So you would only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ends to weave in, because you can also have done your outgoing yarns, your outgoing yarn for yarn B, which I've done there. And that's it. So that's everything that you need to know for knitting up your Festive Feet socks. If you want to share them on Instagram, please do, and use hashtag Festive Feet. It would also be lovely to see these as projects loaded up onto Ravelry.